Oh my God. Are we going to get outsourced after this?
I don't know how, like to other podcasters in India or something, or
History is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. In modern terms, when most people are talking about outsourcing, they're talking about a specific genre called offshoring. That's where you move some kind of business function to a different country. And that's where corporations make a lot of money. Some outsourcing includes offshoring, but not all. Outsourcing can be entirely domestic. It can be macro and micro. And there are a lot of advantages. If you're a business owner, obviously this makes sense. You can potentially save a ton of money and a ton of headaches as long as you get away with it. I mean, first, you don't have to pay for all the expenses of in-house labor. Things like insurance benefits, vacation time, maybe a 401k, stuff that full-time in-house employees theoretically would expect or would strive for. And then second, you can employ fewer people. No need for that pesky IT department. We have a company that just leases and services all our computers. We signed a 4-year deal. If something goes wrong with the printer, just call those guys. I think his name is Chuck. It's not always Chuck, but it's usually Chuck. Like, that's very common, you know? Anybody who has an office printer might be familiar with that. And maybe most importantly, you save time, the only real currency of our age. You don't have to spend hours training an employee to do this thing. You don't have to pay a premium to bring someone else's expertise in-house. And maybe, best of all, for really busy executives, you don't have to really learn something new yourself. You can just delegate it. But the big money is interested in some big loopholes. The stuff like going to a country with a different tax system that's maybe a little more friendly to you. A country that's not as, hot and bothered about some aspects of workers' rights. Or, they say, hey, the environment can take care of itself. We don't need to regulate that. It becomes like when you start listing those benefits, it becomes increasingly like a made for TV infomercial. But wait, there's more, because there's always something else that would not fly in the United States that might fly in another country. And,
Yeah.
Honestly, taxation's a big part.
And there are ridiculous, we're going to get into this, a ridiculous number of companies out there that will outsource your work. And it's a crazy competitive market. You can find article after article written by companies or representatives of companies that are extolling these things that Ben is describing, all of the made-for-TV commercials for outsourcing, for everything from legal stuff like we were talking about, taxes, IT, even teaching, like educational jobs. It's crazy.
but there's apps and stuff for this now. We've done ads, I think, for ZipRecruiter, which would be considered, I guess, outsourcing hiring. Right, like or like LegalZoom, which is what you were just describing, Matt, like outsourcing legal tasks, and then those things are very functional and make a lot of sense if you are a small company. But when you start seeing larger companies doing this stuff at scale, to use a douchey kind of business buzzword, that is when it starts being problematic. Because I've seen things like, for example, outsourcing of graphic design. Say, like for a big company, using some of these kind of like outsourcing graphic design sites and services that essentially go for the lowest bidder in other countries where wages are much lower, in order to get a logo design or something like that, something that maybe could go to an independent freelance graphic designer or small independently owned graphic design firm in America. And again, I'm not saying that these other, workers, these other freelancers in other countries shouldn't be getting work, but it's kind of for like a weird, slightly sketchy reason, at what point are you saving money at the detriment of your own country's economy?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned two things, guys. First, that 2009 Onion article. We'll get back to that in a second. And then or we'll get back to that later in this episode. And then secondly, corporate buzz terms, because since I have an absolute iron grasp on priorities, I stayed up late last night doing research, and then I stopped and just wrote out fake buzzwords, because you hear so many, especially on the pro outsourcing side. You know, I was thinking about specific forms of outsourcing, how you make them sound more customer friendly, like trout sourcing, pout sourcing. You know what I mean? Route sourcing. That's the way.
Clout sourcing.
Yeah, clout sourcing was one of the first ones, because I had to talk with someone in LA today, or yesterday. But spoiler, not everyone loves outsourcing. Not everyone sees it in this kind of idealistic Thomas Friedman-esque way. And when we ask why they don't like it, we note that a lot of the critics dislike it for the same reasons a lot of business owners and shareholders love it. And these critics, by the way, are from all areas of the political spectrum, and they don't all agree about why they think outsourcing is bad. In their view, though, you could say that they would generally argue outsourcing is not just an at times ruthless move to increase revenue. It's a dangerous tactic with consequences far beyond quarterly profits. And in some cases, they argue it's a conspiracy. As Van Morrison once said, cast your memory back there. But we're not going back to the Brown Eyed Girl song. We're going back to the 1990s, which was an uncomfortably long time ago now. And what would that be? 30 years ago, right?
Oh, it's, you know, the math that makes you really feel old, or really feel the passage of time, when you say, like, we're as far away from the 1990s as the 1990s was from the 1950s, or something like that.
Well, it's a
No,
bummer.
maybe not 50s, but 60s.
60s, yeah. But there was something really weird happening. There was a sea change. And I think the ocean is a good parallel for what we're going to explore today. There was a sea change in the world of U.S. business, a massive migration of manufacturing jobs. You know, all those solid gigs that people once had in the trades or manufacturing. You know, you didn't have to go to college for 4 years. You could get out of high school or get out of military service, and then you could make a pretty good living doing what people would sometimes call blue collar work, right? And you could send your kids to college. You could maybe go to college if you wanted to, but why would you when you had a solid job just waiting for you? The thing was, these jobs were no longer solid. They were relocating to developing countries because of those lower wage standards, because of little to no safety standards, environmental regulations, all these other factors, each of which dramatically lowers production costs for these companies. And to be fair, you know, the people on the other side, the people in the countries that are practicing what we would call insourcing, I know these buzzwords, the insourcing employees were just regular people too. They are just regular people. And in some cases, in many cases, you could say this was good for those prospective employees. They weren't making as much as they would, were they doing the same job in the U.S., which is pretty much the whole point for the corporations, but they would have a solid, hopefully sustainable job, in theory, because sometimes these situations were disastrous. And when we talk about disaster, we got to talk about all these really disturbing short and long-term consequences. I think the first few are obvious, but it gets muddy really quickly.